God, come and learn about Him. Here's the Bible with Pastor Adam.
Hi guys, we're back. We're back with the Bible with Pastor Adam, another Wednesday. We're nearing the end of Genesis. Actually, we're into our last two key Bible stories here in Genesis, and today we're in Genesis chapter 37. And we're going to be reading about one of Jacob's sons, Joseph. Actually, we're going to be reading about all of his sons, but focusing on his son, Joseph. So, we are in Genesis 37 once again. This week and next week, and then we'll be out of Genesis and on to the next book, which is Exodus. So here we are, Genesis 37. Jacob lived in the land of Canaan, and he had 12 sons, and the oldest was Reuben, and the youngest was Benjamin. Of all his sons, though, Jacob loved the one named Joseph best of all. When Joseph was 17 years old, Jacob made a fancy coat for him, a coat of many colors. His brothers didn't like this. They were very, very jealous. They could not speak a kind word at all about Joseph or to Joseph. One night, Joseph had a strange dream. He and his brothers were out in a field, tying wheat into bundles. His bundle of wheat stood up straight, but the others stood around it and bowed down to it. He told his brothers about the dream, and they laughed at him. They laughed at the idea that they would ever bow down to him. See, the dream was a dream about how in the future his brothers would serve him, even though he wasn't one of the older ones. And they didn't like this, and they laughed at his dream, and they laughed at the idea that they would ever serve Joseph or do what he said. And then Joseph had another dream. "Listen," he said to his brothers, "this time I dreamed that the sun and the moon and even the stars were bowing down to me." Could the dream mean one day Joseph would rule over his father and mother and all of his brothers? The dreams made the brothers even more bitter, angry, and jealous toward Joseph. "Here comes the dreamer." Joseph's brothers were out in the fields, looking after their goats and sheep, making fun of him. They saw him coming. "Here he comes, that dreamer. It's time we taught him a lesson," his brother Levi said. When Joseph reached the camp where they were at, the brothers grabbed him, and they threw him into a deep pit all the way down. "What should we do with him?" Judah asked. Just then, some traders came along. They were on their way to Egypt. The brothers did a despicable thing, an awful thing. The brothers sold Joseph to the traders for 20 pieces of silver. But first, they tore off that fancy coat that their father had made for him. The traders took him away in chains to be a slave. When the brothers got back home, they told their father that Joseph had been killed by a wild animal, and they showed him Joseph's coat, which they had covered in goat's blood to make that lie seem like the truth. Jacob wept and tore his clothes, and his sons tried to comfort him, but Jacob would not stop crying for his beloved Joseph and losing his favorite son. Kind of shows you what jealousy and bitterness can do in a relationship. This was their own brother. And because of their jealousy toward him, they did a awful thing. They sold him. They gave him away. They treated him like he was nothing but an object. It's really sad. Really, really sad. Keep in mind, though, before we break from today, God has a plan for Joseph. And just because these people, his own brothers, did this awful thing, God's plan will still come true. But remember, when you get jealous, how do you act toward people that you're supposed to love? Do you treat them the way his brothers treated him? Or do you talk to them? Do you express yourself in a healthy way? His brothers did not. They did an awful thing. Think about it though, guys. And we'll come back next week and learn about how this story ends for Joseph, his brothers, his father. And we'll see how the book of Genesis sort of wraps up. See you next week.